Welcome to part 2 of our chat with Phil Learney on the Gym Owners Forum podcast. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd really recommend going back and watching it, as there's loads of really, really good stuff on there. If you have watched it, then I'm sure you're eager to get started on this, so I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get into it.
So social anxiety is a really interesting one because we work on internal biology. You know, we're mammals, right? Mammals get up by the sun, they go to bed when the sun goes down. We don't do that, you know, because work schedules, because of modern life, because of all those different things. And obviously we also, you know, we don't fly across continents over weeks and months like birds do, you know, and reacclimatize. What we do is we hop on a plane, we're there in 8 hours, and then we're in a completely different time zone. So if you imagine that same thing happening biologically when somebody goes out on a Friday night. So if your normal bedtime's 10 o'clock, you go out until 1 o'clock, you're 3 hours in debt of sleep. Now, at that point, there's not really too much of a problem. You just also sleep. But then we sleep in. Now, when we sleep in, we shift our entire biology by 3 hours. So we're creating a form of jet lag. So our biologists, you know, all these things are waiting for these cues and these things that it's expecting to do. And it goes, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing because the cues are all wrong. So if you think about the, you know, habits and behaviors, and we talked about this with respect to, you know, the cleaner in the gym, they've got to have a structure. And we've just lost that structure. So if you go back to like baby books, so if you've had a baby and you bought a baby book, every baby book for the last, you know, however many decades has always said the same thing. It's routine. So you're looking for cues, biological cues. And what we've done is we just remove those cues. So when we remove those cues, there's a bunch of confusion, a bunch of systems in your body just don't know what they're meant to be doing. Your brain, your biology, the circulatory system, they're all kind of confused because they're waiting for these cues. So it takes us a while to correct that. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to spend days and days and days correcting that and then do it again. So people with this social calendar that occurs every Friday and Saturday night, essentially their biology to get misaligned all the time. So when we do that, it ruins the structure. And, you know, we talked about structure, we've talked about mapping plans, and we talked about this in the 101 to some degree.
Yeah.
Where it was, look, you know, it's action and execute this thing. And it's not about making life boring. It's about just understanding that when we compromise this, we've got to find a way of recorrecting it, which is kind of what we do. You know, we look at the reality is that people aren't always going to get up at the same time or go to bed at the same time. But what do they do when they disrupt it? What do they do when they, you know, knock this out of sync because of social, you know, commitments, or, you know, it might be, you know, whatever it might be. But when you trade that off for watching another episode of Netflix, which is what we get in the high performers world often, is the detriment to your performance is significant. You know, you get sleep deprivation, somebody getting less than 6 hours sleep a night. I mean, it's across the board. It's everything. And we're not talking a couple of percent here and there. We're talking huge statistical numbers that drop, you know. So when we anecdotally look back at these people throughout time who've always said sleep's like the worst thing ever. I think it was Hemingway said some stuff about it way back in. And it was this thing, it was just I can't remember what they said. It was something like it was the most horrendous cost of life or waste of life is sleeping. But ultimately, now we understand biology. We know better than that. And I always use you know, you go back to like the Wolf of Wall Street, is that generation. They figured out a way to stay awake and to get adequate rest. And that was through the use of stimulants and depressants or sedatives, you know, P's and downies. And it's remarkable because we see these things, this cohort of people that find a solution to a problem, which is what they did. And then years later, we find out that solution didn't really stack up. We were talking about this before with respect to trajectory data, is that somebody's got to do something really badly for a period of time before we know it's really bad for them. And what we're doing now, and this is why the wellness piece within clubs and things, and again, we might get onto this, is that that has now extended, because what we've got is we've got these cohorts of people that have seen what these other cohorts of people have done historically and gone, they didn't do very well. You know, so that first generation of people who made money, they compromised everything. Family lives, you know, spending time with kids, all this stuff, great. They had a massive bank balance. They improved the quality of life of their family or in and around them, but they compromised certain things. And then the next generation were like, well, we don't need to do this, so we'll just party. And then they end up with problems. You know, a different set of problems. But then the next generation, kind of where we are now, people are going, well, hold on. We kind of want this balance that everybody's been talking about for the last century. And we want this, we want to look at wellness, and we want to look at sleep, and we want to look at all these things because we now statistically know, because we've given enough time to that cohort and that study. Because remember, we're in this lifelong study. I'm a candidate in a study. I'm part of a cohort in a big study. And what we'll know in 5 years, the information and data we'll know around social media and the impact social media has on people will be huge. And it's already starting to come through. But it took a bit of time to get any data at all, right? We don't know this. And again, you guys play with data all the time because we're going to, what are the trends? What are the things we see? What are the retention numbers? What are the acquisition numbers? What are these sort of things? And if we don't look at the numbers, we don't know. But you've got to give it a bit of time to learn what do those numbers mean. And again, we can circumnavigate around it. But in essence, when we look at sleep patterns, we're just trying to regulate them.
Yeah, I think actually going back to what you said about how things have evolved and finding that balance, everything you said is right. It's finding that kind of balance of actually, do I want to, because at the end of the day, I think there's people that probably do prioritize like their social life over their actual business life, which is fine. But then actually it's finding your balance of doing that, which is just the most important thing. It's completely subjective. And I think, as the industry evolves as well, you might find ways that actually you've innovated and you can maybe, put a bit more time into social life because actually you're saving time in your busiest life, and in your sleep life, with, as you say, Wolf of Wall Street stimulants and things like that. Don't recommend that, by the way, anyway. So I think going on to this kind of topic of the evolution of the industry and the wellness sector, there's kind of a few caveats I kind of wanted to touch on. Obviously, just general evolution of the last sort of decade since before that as well, but then also actually the COVID aspect, because then I think the number of gyms has grown since last year, but it's not actually even close to the level it was pre-COVID in terms of number of gyms. And so if you could kind of touch on maybe what the reasoning is for that and how the industry's evolved in that sense, but then also, how just the wellness sector's evolved in general.
Well, the reason the numbers I'm stacked, I would say, look, it's the earthquake scenario, right? It's very quick to knock businesses down, which is what COVID did. It's very difficult to rebuild them. And we're not talking about, building actually being physically knocked down here, but we're talking about the rebuilding of an industry. And the rebuild is always going to be slower. But what happens is, and again, the same thing happens. And again, it's horrible to look at it this way. But, you look at an earthquake or a tornado or whatever it might be, ultimately what gets rebuilt is better than what was there before.
Yeah.
And this is, COVID, as much as it was a horrendous time for so many businesses and so many people. And obviously there's still the after effects of it now, the aftershock, as using the analogy we used. But we've learned things from it.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that were pointed at from a wellness perspective where people were like, well, hold on, we aren't infallible here. As we could be shut down with this. So now businesses are operating better because they're putting contingencies in place for things that might happen instead of the things they assume won't happen. They're operating better. They're operating leaner. They're giving more flexibility to their working staff because, I went to Dubai, middle of last year, and got asked to go and speak at a thing called the Retail Summit. The Retail Summit is all the high street retailers. And the reason I was there, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was there to talk about what did we learn from businesses moving away essentially from the 9-5. Because what it did is they were really surprised, all these old heads of these businesses were really surprised that, and again, the 9-5 was made in 1926 by Henry Ford because it suited his factory line, but we've never questioned it. But because it's this thing they've always done, they continue to do it. But COVID, what it did, it threw the spanner in the works that they didn't have any choice but to move away from it.
Yeah.
And what happened is they moved away from it, and some of the results they got were incredible. And what they're now doing is they're looking at these numbers and going, I don't understand this. So they're getting people like us to come in and go, what's happened here? Why are people performing better if we give them more flexibility around the working schedule? Because we assume that these people aren't going to work very hard. If we give them an inch, they'll take a mile, you know what I mean? But what they fail to recognize is that people really wanted to be working. They really need the money. They wanted the jobs. They wanted to move up the corporate ladder, whatever that corporate ladder might look like.
Purpose, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, and a lot of people, their lives revolve around work, you know, and work revolves around providing for their families. So when you start to take that away, or you threaten to take that away, people work hard. And this is what happened. So they're at the other end of it now, and they're going, well, do we need to look at a 9-5? Do we need to be more subjective about it? Do we move working schedules? Is there a better time for certain people to work out than others? Yes, there is. We know this through chronotype. We know this through circadian biology. But then we can layer all these other things on top of it and go, well, hold on, can we do this better? So we do a lot of work with shift workers. Can we do that better? Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can do shift work way better than we've ever done it before. But nobody ever put a contingency in place, and nobody ever put a budget towards it because they didn't think they needed it. Just like, again, go to gyms and clubs. They never had a budget for certain things. They need budgets for that, you know, because they didn't need them. Yeah. You know, back in the day, you used to walk into a gym, you used to pay your fee, you didn't have to register anything, you didn't have to do any of that. You know, fundamentally, you guys create the solution to a myriad of problems that facilities had. That's what your business revolved around. And this is what we're doing. We're just looking at problems that have been brought to the surface by whatever, and we're finding solutions to them. And this is now the wellness space. The wellness space is now looking at problems we didn't really understood existed.
Yeah.
And now they've been, oh, wow, this really does exist. You know, we do a lot of work in the space of lighting. You know, we look at light quality now. We look at noise quality. We look at air quality. We look at all these things, and now it's a big thing because people know that cumulatively over time, if the air quality in your bedroom's poor, you're probably going to get sick. Or people are going to get looked at it. Yeah. People know that if you work under lighting that doesn't create enough, you know, the frequencies of light, so it doesn't mimic the outdoor space, we've got a problem because that person's going to consume more stimulants because they're not going to be as alert and awake as the next person who's got the office right next to the window. And bizarrely, when you go into a lot of these office spaces, what they do is they have all these windows, particularly in, you know, when you get to high-rise buildings, got all these windows with all this light coming in. And what they do is they turn the backs to it. All the desks all face inwards instead of facing the light.
Okay.
And it's remarkable to do it because ultimately the biggest probably cognitive enhancer that they could do is give this person access to decent light.
Yeah.
You know, so there's all of these things. And again, we look at circadian architecture and we go into these wellness facilities that are now being built. And they're all being built around this. You know, they're putting what we call biocentric lighting. So all the bulbs, they emit the same frequencies as daylight. They're looking at air quality and everything. They're looking at sound as something that's a stimulus. You know, do we block sound out? Do we maintain sound? Do we have a different type of tone? Do we drop the tone under? And then there's all these different things and it's that response, right? And hotels, hospitality, fitness facilities, gyms, wellness facilities. Because remember, I think now what's happening is the emergence of the wellness facility is now it's a hotel in many respects.
Yeah.
Gyms aren't. They're facilities that have amenities.
Yeah.
And they can be put in that same space as what a luxury hotel is, in my view. You know, there's so many comparables. I've been using the hotel analogy for years. I grew up in a hotel. You know, it was pumped, but it was and summer. But you know, we had like 8 rooms. So hospitality has always been something I've been in and you know, have an avid interest in many respects. But it was, you know, one of the best. And again, a little anecdote, side story here. I went to a lecture by a chap called Peter Burwash, who was in the world tennis, with ex-tennis professional, but he did a lot of consultancy for 4 seasons. And probably 20 years ago, I got told I had to go to a seminar by this Peter Burwash chap who was talking about service modeling. And it was something I was like, I don't want to go to this. It's going to be pathetic. It's going to be useless. One of the best things I've ever done. Went to it and he just basically told us about the service model that hotels had. And he made those comparables to the fitness industry. And at the time, I was part of we talked about this off camera beforehand, but the facilities they were trying to open, they were looking at concierge services. Yeah. So it was this whole thing about what kind of service do we need to deliver to the people that walk through these doors? Gyms and fitness facilities now have to look at it in the exact same guise as a concierge at a hotel would, as the personal trainers.
It's really interesting actually, because I mean, going way back to kind of go way forward, the COVID thing, as you say, like it was terrible, but it's these kind of things like that life chucks at you, and this is not trying to be deep in any way, shape, or form, but these kind of things that life chucks at you, like if you can, take the good things from it, and I'm a massive silver linings person, like always try and find the silver linings. So if finding those silver linings in how you can actually revolutionize the business is like the only thing you really can do in those situations, I think, because obviously you're allowed to kind of feel bad for yourself and feel crap about bad things that have happened, but it's that drive to push through and like see how we can make this actually a good thing is probably one of the like more important things outside of one of the more important mentality things, if that's the kind of the right thing to say, because I think success in business is massively, obviously it's the physical side of it, as you say, like the circadian rhythms and getting the proper sleep, in, like getting into the neutral state of not hyperarousal. Sorry, yeah. I'm trying to learn. But I think the other side of that is massively the mentality side of it and the drive to actually just want to be there and be successful. And I think that's why the 9 to 5 we're finding now is like not actually the best way to work, because actually it's why do people want to work? It's not because they're working 9 to 5. It's because they like the job. It's because, as you say, they need the money, all that kind of stuff. So actually it's again, coming full circle, it's talking to people and actually listening to them and thinking, what do they need? Because work from home won't suit everyone as well. I know I hate it and I'm terrible at it and I will watch TV all day. So, sorry, old bosses and things like that, but that's the case. But yeah, I like being in the office is what I need. So that's what I do. And it's actually seeing everyone in your organization and even yourself as an individual to then actually say, what's the best way we can work? How can we actually improve everyone's sleep cycles, everyone's performance? And it is just, it's a case by case thing. There's no one size fits all tool for this thing.
I think the world of the term hybrid is being thrown around everywhere now, but every, cars, bikes, everything work. But even coaching, hybrid models, ultimately when I used to coach clients, and I used this story the other day when I was talking to some upcoming coaches who wanted some advice. And I said, look, when I coached, online coaching didn't really exist. But now if I was to go back into that space, I would do a hybrid model, because what I would do is I'd train you for a period of time to teach you what you need to do yourself. And ultimately, I'm trying to create autonomy for you, right? I'm trying to teach you to do all the things that you need to do to achieve the outcome you want. It's like doing a business mentorship. It's like somebody in an office space is that person who's going to outgrow the office space. They're going to outgrow the position. And that's really, as business owners, that's kind of what you hope. The problem you have is that when you get to that point of they've outgrown the business, either they move on or they move up. So it's one or the other.
Yeah.
Now, if that person's stagnant, the problem is you've got somebody who doesn't do a job very well.
Yeah.
Constantly. They get the job done, but they don't do the job very well. What you want is somebody who either wants to move on or move up. You don't want really somebody there. And those people will exist. And there's roles that we'll find for them that we just need that done every single day. And that's fine. That's fair. And if people want to exist in there, that's their quality of life will remain the same. Well, it actually won't, because when we look at tax and blah, 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 that doesn't actually happen. It goes down, which means you've always kind of got to be on some form of an upward trajectory. Otherwise, quality of life goes down. So we've got to understand that as owners, we're developing these people who are going to leave us. And as a coach, I always coach people with the intent for them to leave me. Not unfortunately for me, fortunately in many respects, but none of them left.
Yeah.
Is it because my service was so good? They didn't want to move on to somebody else. They didn't want to try somebody else. Not to say they could have gone with another coaching or better results, but everything they had a problem with, I dealt with. That was part of the service model I did. And this is the same thing with clubs, is that you've got to look at demographics. You've got to go, right, what are the problems they have? What are we going to try and solve for them? And there's always going to be the kind of budget gyms who, what's the problem? The problem is people are intimidated by the gym environment. And again, I always talk about this as one of the best innovations that ever happened. And I can't remember who first did it, but Pure Gym were probably the first ones that kind of industrialized it. And what they did is they created a reception desk that wasn't a reception desk. It was a swipe card. Yes. Which meant all these people intimidated by the gym, they had to come in and greet somebody who they knew was going to look them up and down and judge them.
Yeah.
Don't have that anymore. You just have a machine. You step in a thing, it turns around and puts you in the gym. The cool thing about then is that there's nobody on the gym floor that's going to navigate and tell you where you've got to go. So you just go wherever you are comfortable. And I think it was just such an incredible time for the gym world, because what they did is they made something, and I don't know whether it's intentional. I don't know to this day. I've managed to speak to someone at a senior level that's maybe, was this an educated decision or was it just something that happened? But ultimately what they did is they made it accessible. And this is, and again, to talk about something that's, again, very much, it's a trend right now, because I guess that's where it sits, but it won't be a trend, is that we look at things like GLP-1. So GLP-1, every industry is going, oh, it's going to take the job and the role. And, I put a post quite some time ago and it went ballistic. And everybody's like, yeah, you're just saying this because you're threatened. I said, but I'm not threatened, because I think it's a fantastic invention. I think it's something that will change so many lives in such a positive way. And everybody's like, yeah, but it's going to take your job. I said, no, it's not. I said, because what we've got now is we've got people who wouldn't go to the gym before because they felt it was just that they're just treading water. They didn't feel like they were ever getting the progression.
Yeah.
Now they get progression. They're going regularly. So all the things we've been wanting people to do for the last however many decades, I just want people to be consistently going to the gym, working out, because it's good for them, irrespective of whether their physique changed or what, but it's good for them. And it's good for their mental health, it's good for their physical health. So we've got all these people who would never step foot in a gym now who've got this confidence to do so. That's a massive positive. Then we've also got the people who are in that, obese, morbidly obese, where they should be using these kind of compounds.
Yeah.
And it's helping them get over that initial hurdle to get them to the point that we'd essentially generally be handling them at. But it's like this thing where when you say to somebody, are you going to, personal training, you're going to take a personal trainer on, they'll say, well, I'm going to get fit before I get a personal trainer. It sounds the most crazy thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But people do. But that is the mentality people have. So we can look at it in many different ways. But I'm like, look, this is something that's here to stay. It's something that will change the environment that we live in forever. And we need to understand it. We need to utilize it. We need to embrace it. We need to be subjective about it. Obviously there's people using it that probably shouldn't be. It will cause its myriad of problems. We'll end up with probably a similar problem that we have with respect to eating disorders. And it will create a catalyst of some description, in my view, of that same thing. And the dysmorphia, blah, 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 we've got problems, is that then it becomes a psychological challenge, which will then create other problems, but also create other opportunities. And this is just life, right? It just goes on. And these things that are detrimental and, like you said, silver linings, these things are horrible, but ultimately we've got to learn something from them. And if we don't, we've got a problem.
Yeah, it's like you said, really, like something that gets people into the gym is never going to be a bad thing, I guess. I won't speak too soon on that, but I think that's the main thing. And then eventually, like, it's the reason that, like your third spaces and your pure gyms exist, and they're opposite ends of the spectrum completely, but they exist because it's for use of a better term, it's different strokes for different folks. Like, some people want the budget gym, they just want to go in and train. They don't care about anything else other than them just lifting weights. And then there's some people that want that like curated experience where they want to be cared for. And so by getting people into the fitness industry, they'll kind of naturally filter into where they want to go anyway. So yeah,
it's servicing demand, right?
Yeah.
And we were members as a family of David Lloyd for a long time. And ultimately we cancelled that membership because we just used the gym.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm paying this enormous amount of money for all these amenities, facilities, blah, blah, blah. And it's the same mentality I have with hotels, right?
Yeah.
I love a hotel, but like a proper hotel. But then I have business trips where I'm like, what do I need? I need a bed. I'm not going to use any amenities. I'm not going to use any facilities. I don't want to pay this enormous amount of money to walk in, to be greeted by name and have this beautiful experience, to then literally just finish my convention or whatever it might be, to then go and get into bed, fall asleep, wake up the next morning and leave.
Yeah.
I'm not prepared to pay for that experience because I don't want an experience. I just want a decent bed. But I will also factor in the fact that I've got to have a hotel of a quality that they're going to have amenities that I need, which I regard as things like, Do they have blackout blinds?
Yeah.
You know, can I accommodate for that? If they don't, yeah, eye pillow. You know, do they have temperature control? That's a biggie for me. If they don't have temperature in rooms, I'm out. You know, because if I get into a room that's too hot, too cold, I won't sleep. If I want to sleep, chances are, if I'm sleeping in that kind of hotel, I've probably got a convention or I'm speaking the next day, which means that I don't want to invest in a bed, fancy bed. But again, the mattress qualities and things like this, and a lot of these budget Premier Inn do it. You know, the mattress qualities are a lot better, but the pillows might not be. So in which case I might travel with my own pillow. I might take my own pillow kits. So there's all these different criteria, but ultimately it doesn't mean that I have to spend huge amounts of money staying in a 5-star hotel that has all these beautiful amenities. But it's the same with a gym. What do I want? I want somewhere to work out. Can I do that in the spit and sawdust gym down the road that doesn't ever clean? And, you know, I can, but will I get bored of that? And will I get bored of every time I pick up a barbell up, so then wipe all the rust off my hand? And it's, like you said, different strokes for different folks, but it's all to do with the requisite. I love a luxury gym, but I also love a spit and sawdust gym. But it depends what I want to get out of it. You know what I mean? So
being a scientist and obviously, you know, being into the kind of research part of the industry, I think obviously it is massively important, you know, being objective with this kind of stuff when it is talking about health. Going by vibes normally ends up like injuring people, I'd say. Can you kind of dive into some of the kind of latest research and the latest like findings that you think are kind of really important that are at the kind of forefront of thinking?
with respect to, because again, it's a broad category here.
Whatever kind of interests you the most. I think because it is such a broad category, there's so much stuff to talk about and there's importance to it.
I mean, the wellness space is evolving rapidly. You know, and we touched on this earlier before. Didn't really say both words, but we touched on this earlier. And there's this thing where there's now this evolution of, you know, wellness facilities and wellness. So there's all these, again, we talked about trends. So there's things like cold water immersion. There's things like infrared. There's like all of these things that are coming out, light management. And, you know, somebody asked me this morning, I've put a picture of me wearing some funky glasses. I've actually got them in my bag. I can whip my eyes around and say, you know, wearing these glasses to modulate circadian biology. So I was on a train this morning at 6 a.m. and at home, what I have is what's classified as biocentric lighting in my city we talked about before. So when I turn that on, I'm in daylight, theoretically.
Is biocentric lighting just like light and minute daylight?
Yeah, minute daylight. Yeah, it has all the spectrums of daylight. So it just means that I don't need to seek the sun in the morning, but that only happens in winter. So during summer, I can get up at 6 a.m. and the sun's up. So I'll spend some time outside, and I'll align one of my behaviors with actually going outside when I do that. And then we look at, you know, trends like cold water immersion. Cold water immersion is an interesting one because, again, we're seeing this a lot in close. They're putting ice baths and cold plunges and blah, blah, blah. They've been around for a long time, you know, particularly in elite performance spaces. And the problem we have here is that you have, and in the world of science, you get the kind of people who are like, no, I'm completely against it, even though there is data. And then there's the people who I'm completely for it. And then, like I say, it's the stone throwing and the people in the middle. And then the people in the middle are sat there going, well, hold on, what we've got an emerging field here. Is that we know it's really good for some things. We know it's really bad for others. We also know that they've manipulated some of the data a little bit. You know, everybody talks about the 250% dopamine. That's whole body dopamine. It's not brain dopamine. So it's very different. So the one is, so it will actually make you urinate. That's what whole body dopamine will do. So there's misinterpreted data to almost, it's what they classify as science washing. So what we're doing is we're going to use some science. We're going to selectively sort of pick some numbers and say, if you get an ice bath, it has the same effect on you as cocaine does. When in essence, there's brain, whole body dopamine, and they're very different things. But that's cool. We've just got to work around it. We've got to explain this to people. But we also know that there's thousands and thousands of people doing something that is pretty comfortable on a regular basis. Now, to me, not as a scientist, as somebody who just looks at things logically, is that, and somebody who's coached people for a long, long time, you know, did like in excess of 40,000 one-on-one sessions with people, getting a human being to do something that's difficult on a repeated basis is difficult.
Yeah.
Because human beings aren't resonate towards things that are difficult. We just don't. and more so in society now than probably ever, is that people want an easy life. So why are people doing this? So I've got my subjective head on going, why are hundreds of thousands of people getting cold water every single day if there is no benefit reported? But then there's hypothesis around what we're expecting to see. And like I say, with that trajectory of data, is everything's looking pretty positive. But what we're doing is we're learning stuff as we go along. We've just learned some stuff about when and where you should use it, blah, 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 how frequently. And there's all this data now that's coming out. Why? Because people are making money from it.
Yes.
So they're studying it. So they're going, whereas years ago, athletes used to use it to actually alleviate largely inflammation on the tendons and ligaments. Yeah, it wasn't really to the muscles, but, and one of the big arguments for not using it right now is, and people go, well, it's no good if you train. It mutes the hypertrophy response. So if you're a bodybuilder, you probably don't want to be jumping in an ice bath after you train it. So it compromises the hypertrophy response. And again, these are two different mechanisms, mTOR and PK, and there's all these different mechanisms that we talk about, but we start to get complex. But stuff like that where it's emerging, looks promising, looks like a positive action that people are doing every day. And if nothing else, it's just building a bit of resilience up and move on. So there's no real negatives. You probably want to be a bit careful if you've got heart problems and various other bits and pieces and, shot proteins and all these different things. But ultimately, it's a positive habit. Yet we're not doing anything about things that we know. We talked about vaping earlier on. There's nobody out there really condemning and slamming vaping in the same way people are, people in the health industry should be slamming the things that, but because it's on trend, and we talked about this before, is that you got to go, right, so this is a trend, so what we're doing, we're going to hammer into it because they'll get me loads of views. Instead of going, right, hold on, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this world that really as health and wellness professionals, we should be hammering, but we're not. We're too busy hammering at trends that are probably quite a positive thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's the, firstly, you maybe never want to go in an ice bath again because it makes me think people are peed in now. So I'm going to be.
Oh, no, it doesn't make you like subconsciously urinate. It's just the fact that that's the reaction of that dopamine levels. People don't pee.
You're not convincing me. Yeah, you're not convincing me anyway. I think the placebo effect is also is almost, probably not almost, but nearly as good as actually just the natural effect anyway. Because if you perceive that it makes you feel better and it's good for you and you're doing it regularly, then actually that's just a mental boost anyway, isn't it? So that's definitely a massive positive, I guess. So regardless of, as long as it's, as you say, not detrimental to you, who cares really? Chuck yourself in a.
I have an ice bath, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do it on a regular basis.
People swear by it as well.
I love it.
Loads of people online.
I love it. And again, I can get out of it and go, well, the science doesn't say. I'm like, I feel great.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it wakes you up. Do you do it early in the morning or?
It varies. Early in the morning in summer, that's actually one of the things I tie in with the daylight. Whereas doing it in the dark is interesting. Again, we've got quite a nice lighting setup outside, but it's it's different purposes, different modalities. But I get out and I feel great. I'm okay with that. And I'm not. I'd like to think I'm versed enough in science to understand the power and the effect of placebo. And obviously, you can never eradicate it. But again, in my head, I'm like, look, I'm not looking for this placebo. I'm not looking for it. Nobody's told me, nobody's sold it really well to me. Yeah, you're going to feel like this. I'm like, do I feel like this? I think I can subjectively get out of it and go, do I feel good? Yeah, I do. And, my wife does it. She hates it, but loves how it makes her feel.
Yeah.
Hates it, loves how it makes her feel. So she does it. And I'm like, that's a positive.
Yeah.
We're not getting stuck into as an industry the things that we should probably get stuck into because people are terrified of them. I haven't seen anything on social media about anybody saying anything really negative about vaping. Back in the day, nobody talked about smoking. You usually see occasional something where they say, oh, smoking's bad for you. That's about, it's like passing comment.
I think it's starting to become more of a thing, definitely. Like the negativity around vaping. I know as an ex-vaper, my parents grilled me constantly because there was a couple of documentaries that came out about it, and actually you think there's zinc and stuff in it, and it's just why are you smoking that into your lungs? It's just all a bit mental. So it's definitely becoming more of a thing, but I think it's probably taking longer for people to realize because there's no like immediate detriment to the health.
Yeah, but also it's this. It'll never happen to me. Perjury is hardwired into people. It's like it'll never happen to me, and then it does, and then they're like, And then there's, and remember as a coach, a lot of people I dealt with throughout my entire coaching career came to me because the straw brought the camel's back.
Yeah.
So they come to me and go, oh my God, I'm literally about to drop down dead because I drink too much. I have bad diet. I'm overweight. I don't exercise. And they came to me with all these things and go, I need to start doing all these things. And I'm like, right, let's address each one of them step by step. Yeah, let's bring them in. And I can't do all 5. I make that very clear to them. I'm like, there's no way on this planet that you will habitually change all of this. So we've got to go strategically and step by step, and we set our plan, and we follow the plan. And that's what we did. I was very good at it.
Yeah, no, I know. I can definitely appreciate that. What percentage of this is actually like marginal gains? And well, that's pretty double percentage, isn't it? It's not fair. But yeah, like what amount, what level of this is like marginal gains, and what actually is like maybe 5% rather than that 1%?
With respect to
And with respect to like high performance. So as you say, like the ice baths, like I put that in the category of marginal gains, maybe because it's just like adding to your routine. Whereas like if we look at the circadian rhythms and
right, so if we look at the true performance enhancers, if I was to give you the magic bullet, right? Yeah. So whatever you're looking for in whatever you've joined a gym or a fitness facility for, so give me some. What could people be there for?
Yeah, just like because they've been told by a doctor.
So he's
just there.
There's weight loss, general health, mental health, metabolic health, cellular health.
Okay, yeah. Fine.
So we go into all these categories, right? They're coming in for one of them or multiples of it.
Yes.
If you look at the magic bullet for longevity, what is the biggest anti-aging thing that you can do? And we're talking significant difference here. Statistically significant is quite a low percentage in the grand scheme. We're talking multiples of this statistic, right? Multiples. Sleep. Yeah. If you improve somebody's sleep, mental health jumps massively. You've got like a 40% increase in depressive symptoms if you are sleep deprived. Anxiety and stress levels go up by 25%. So we're getting, and then we can go into the physical aspects. And we're talking, they're not insignificant numbers. These are significant and huge numbers. But it's this one space where people are like, look, Netflix have just teased me the next episode. So rather than me getting my full 8 hours sleep, I'm just going to get 6. And people will trade that off in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because we don't know the difference.
I think it's weird because it's probably one of the only things in your life that you actually don't do like consciously. Like you don't, this is going to be a really hippie thing to say, I guess, but you don't like know what sleep like feels like. So you don't necessarily know the effect of it when you're doing it, if that makes sense.
It doesn't know any different though. Yeah, it's somebody with a bad diet. The problem we have now, and again from a nutritional standpoint, the problem we have is that you have now got children who are now grown adults who've never had a good diet at any stage of their life.
Yeah.
So how are they meant to know the difference? If you've never slept well, how do you know the difference? You've never experienced it. You've never felt what it's like to have good sleep. So therefore, you just think what I experienced today is normal. Now, when you move people to right, this is what good sleep looks like statistically, but you've also got to prove it to them. It's a bit like going to the gym. What do people constantly ask to trainers? Am I putting on muscle? Am I getting lighter? Am I getting stronger? Whereas it might be completely obvious. You'll have somebody who goes to the gym who'll, deadlift more than they did when they started. Yet they'll still turn around to their coach and go, do you think I'm getting stronger?
It's the validation, I guess.
Yeah, it's the validation. And the problem is that we don't have enough validation. And what's happening now is we've got a little bit more sleep data than we used to. So people are wearing Whoops or Ouras or Ultrahumans or Garmins and going, if I drink, my sleep score goes through the floor. We've known this for decades.
Yeah.
You have 4 units of alcohol, your sleep quality will drop by about 40%. We've known this for decades. But we were only able to tell people.
Yes. Okay.
Now we can prove it to them. The difference between telling someone and proving it to them is different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
If I can prove to you what I've been telling you is correct, I don't need to validate it anymore. So you look at the amount of people who have changed their drinking habits based off their wearable tech data. And the wearable tech data isn't actually that accurate when it comes to sleep scores, because again, it's subjective how they do it.
Yeah.
But it's a consistent measure.
Yes.
Which is cool. So it gives them a consistent measure. Now, HRV scores on most of the devices are pretty damn accurate. So that's a data point that as scientists we will look at. So we look at things like nocturnal HRV as a marker rather than a sleep score, because the sleep score is just a device taking the PPG data, which is how most of them measure, taking that PPG data and just interpreting it slightly differently. And that's the only variable between them all. But the interpretations aren't certainly not clinically accurate, but they give a baseline. And if we're improving that baseline, that improvement will show up. It's about like somebody stepping on a set of scales. If the scales are wrong, they're always wrong.
Yes, yeah.
So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
as long as it's consistent, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, what's the importance of incorporating? To be honest, it's kind of an obvious question, but it's good to hear your take on it, I guess. What's the importance of incorporating the wearable tech into like your PT training? And actually, how can you incorporate into just like, if you don't have PTs in the gym, how can you just incorporate that as a gym?
It's understanding data points. I had a discussion actually on the way here with a good friend of mine who's actually been given, a terminal diagnosis. And we were talking to him about sleep, and he said, my sleep's terrible. And I said to him, look, there's probably a large psychological element that he's thinking about a lot, right? He's processing so much stuff. And we were talking about kind of the importance of data. And he said, I feel terrible today. He goes, the hospital measured some stuff. He goes, these numbers are a bit down, without getting into the complexity of it.
Yeah.
He goes, the numbers are down. And I said to him, we have this problem with athletes. I said, if we give a fighter a Panu, Garmin or whatever they wear the night before a fight, what do you think's going to happen? It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible because they're not going to sleep well, because they've got all the anxiety, the stress, it's normal. That is a normal response.
Yeah, of course.
The problem is that you then tell them the next day that they've got a data point that doesn't align with them performing optimally.
Yes, okay.
So we just take the data point away. We don't tell them the number. So if they don't know the number, it's just based off how they feel. Most of them on fight day feel great.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why should we look at this data and then placebo again? And it might not be placebo, it might be actual, but we can override that as human beings. We're very good at overriding it. You might feel terrible. You might statistically tell you that you've got blood markers that say you should feel unwell right now, but you don't.
Yeah.
So crack on. And this is where the wearable stuff is subjective, is that there's a positive, but there's also a massive negative to some degree. So we've got to be able to interpret that data. And I think for coaches, they've got to implement it well, not become obsessive about it. You look at food diaries, apps that log food, great to a point.
Yeah.
Then they become detrimental because then people get obsessive. Now, when they reach that obsessive level, now we're bordering on what could be an eating disorder. And then we start to get problems. So there's application, utilize it when, where, and a lot of it is to do with when do we utilize it effectively.
Yeah, you piqued my curiosity, definitely. Got to look into it now. Okay, so, I mean, yeah, just finally to kind of, I think, start wrapping this up, but we've covered literally everything, which is fantastic. What are some of the, I actually asked you this the last time we spoke, and I don't want the same answer, which was, non-action. But what would you say some of the common pitfalls that people are falling into when, let's say, actually when running their facility and when they're already up and running? What are some of the common traps that people may fall into, and what's the most important thing that they should look out for, basically?
I think probably just failing to probably reassess. They open, it's a bit like a brand, right? You launch a brand and you realize 3 years later that it's the sort of thing that you look at and go, whoa, not so much. We were so far off mark. We didn't quite get it right. We didn't get it. We did speak the right vocabulary to our audience and all this stuff. But what happens is a lot of facilities, they open and they just leave it. and let it run its course. And it's a bit like coaches, is that coaches that I still have coaches from my generation who just moan and complain about the industry instead of adapting.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. What you'll have is and you'll see this in your spheres, is that you'll have a bunch of gyms that in the next 5 years will close because they didn't adapt. Because they're like, I'm not doing that because this is where we've always done it and this has always succeeded. The way you always did it ain't going to work anymore or doesn't work as well. And this is across any industry you look at, any industry, where the failure to adapt and the failure to change will ultimately, the business will hold on.
Yeah.
And it'll hold on for a while. And, the coaches, again, from my generation, they're still charging the same money they did 20 years ago. They still got as many clients. They still farm out the same programs. They still do this, that, the business has evolved.
Yeah. And it's survival of the fittest, really, isn't it? And I think it's that failure to adapt, kills people. It was one of the Room 101 things was failure to adapt technology, because it's literally something that I see all the time.
Tech's incredible, but again, embrace it, utilize it.
Yeah.
Don't assume it's going to replace you, because it isn't.
No.
It's a tool that if you use intelligently can save immense amounts of time, and again, I'm all for, I want people, right? I'm a people person. People, I want people in my business. We'll employ loads of people, but there's also going to be a bunch of stuff that people aren't going to do as well as technology.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, but it means that I can employ people to do people things better.
Yes.
And ultimately everything points back to people, so I harp on to this about, but our two eldest, 19 and 17, and both of them have incredible people skills. And I reiterate to them on multiple occasions when they're worried about the future and they're worried about what they're going to do and they're both incredibly intelligent. They're going to end up with very good qualifications. But I said, look, in the grand scheme of things, you're going to be in a world where everybody else is equally as qualified. It's like university back when everybody's into university. But now people don't regard university degrees in the same way because so many people don't.
Yeah.
So really what are the skills that you can develop alongside that formal education that will put you in better stead than anybody?
Yeah.
People skills.
100%.
If you can communicate with complete strangers and talk to them about what your business does, is that you can get some tech that tries to sell what you do to whoever the end consumer is. They won't do it as well as you, and that's what people will end up doing. People will revert back, in my view. The next few years as technology takes over, people are like, oh, technology is going to take my job. But technology, there's certain things that technology is not going to be able to do that human beings can do.
Yeah.
And you've got to focus on human skills. And human skills are soft skills. Your ability to communicate with other human beings, non-adaptive. And AI is smart, but it's not that smart.
No. And I mean, you look at things like ChatGPT today and it's like, it's all generative. You can tell it's not written by a person. There's no there's no adaptation from the AI as well. So it's
well, what's AI? And I always use the example of iRobot, the movie. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
And ultimately, one of the end phrases is you won't ask them the right question. Now, AI is about asking the right questions in many respects. You ask the right questions, it won't spit out something that sounds like it was made from technology.
Yeah.
But ultimately, who's going to need to craft the question?
By that point, you may as well have just done it yourself.
The human being has to craft the question. So the art comes in the how do I ask the right questions, which is a human skill. Yeah. And you've got to have a human driver at the front of that technology for the technology to work. It's a bit like, a forklift. Is that ultimately, a forklift could self-drive, but it doesn't have the intuition of a human being. So therefore, when, it has this process that it goes through, and this is technology. Technology has a process it goes through, and we're making that process more and more, subtle and nuances. It's incredible what it can do, but ultimately, you still need a human driver at the front.
Yeah. And I think it just to sort of round it off, there's a difference between not knowing how to use technology and refusing to use it. And I think I see people say, "Oh God, I'm just crap with technology." It's like, but you're not crap at learning. You're not crap at look infrastructure a little bit. You're not crap at asking questions. Have a look and see. It's made. Probably a bad one. It's made with idiots in mind, and anyone can use it. Anyone can use most programs. So it's just getting your head around actually that button does that.
And the only reason somebody feels like an idiot is because they've never done it before, or they never needed to do it. If you've never needed to do it, I'm not going to look at you and go, you're an idiot because you don't know how to do that. I don't think you never needed to do it.
Yeah.
If you've never needed to, you look at the skills back in the day of, my dad could do everything. My dad can do everything. But it's because they didn't have the and we talked about this before with employing people. They couldn't pay a carpenter to come down and at one point they couldn't afford furniture. So my dad made it all. And he became very, very good at making furniture.
Yeah.
But now would you ever see those skills? No, you don't, because IKEA exists.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's all of those things, and we still have pieces of furniture at home, and the finish on them is incredible. And I always say, when you travel into these incredible places, if you look at modern versus old architecture, I'm like, wow, old stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody's taken a lot of time and effort over that. New stuff, beautiful, stunning, great use of light and all this stuff, but ultimately it's a bit lazy.
Yeah.
But it's only lazy comparable.
Yeah.
I think there's beauty to both of them, and there's something incredible about both of them, but that there's also just shoddy workmanship that's different, right? But there's great modern architecture versus, but there's different skills being utilized at different modalities. Back in the day, it was like, what can we do? We're really good at carving stone, so we'll carve some stone. Right, that's not really a skill, but nowadays. But now what we have is we have a 3D printer that carves it for us.
Yeah. And now it's like that's extremely specialized and like bespoke stuff, isn't it? But yeah, I heard the saying once, there's no such thing as a stupid person, just a lazy one. And I feel like that kind of, rings true. But I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule on both sides of that. So anyway, on that note, Phil, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Jinx. And we'll see you on the next episode.
That is the end of part 2 of our chat with Phil Learney on the Gym Owners Forum podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Phil for joining us and sharing his kind of wealth of information with us. It was really, really insightful. If you want to see more from Phil, then he's coming to our Gym Owners Workshop on October 9th in Dublin. Get more info on the website. There's a whole page where you can read about it. And I'd also recommend checking out Human 24 and Advanced Coaching Academy, as they're doing so much good stuff and it's literally applicable to absolutely everyone. If you want more from us, then check out the podcast and the other episodes on any place where you can get podcasts, and check us out on socials for more quick-fire, regular tips, tricks, and insights in how to, be successful in the industry. See you on the next episode.